Margaret Chen sat quietly in the corner of the grand dining room, her weathered hands folded in her lap. At 78 years old, she had learned to make herself small, almost invisible. The enormous crystal chandelier above cast dancing shadows across her silver hair, but she kept her eyes down, focused on the untouched plate before her. Across the mahogany table, her son Richard and his wife Victoria discussed their upcoming charity gala with the practiced enthusiasm of people who had turned generosity into a social sport. Their voices carried that particular pitch of excitement reserved for events that would be photographed and featured in the society pages. Margaret had lived in this mansion for 3 years now, ever since her small apartment became too much to manage alone. Richard had insisted she move in, though the invitation had felt more like an obligation than genuine warmth. She understood. Her son was busy, important, running the family investment firm his father had built from nothing. She was grateful, truly. But gratitude and belonging were not the same thing. The household staff moved silently around the edges of the room, refilling water glasses and removing barely touched courses. Among them was Keisha Williams, a young woman of 24 whose presence had become a quiet comfort to Margaret over the past 6 months. Keisha worked as a caregiver, hired to help Margaret with her daily routines, her medications, the small tasks that had become mountains as arthritis settled deeper into her bones. There was something different about Keisha. While others in the household performed their duties with professional distance, Keisha brought warmth. She remembered how Margaret liked her tea, extra hot with a thin slice of lemon. She knew that Margaret preferred to sit by the east windows in the afternoon when the light was softest. Small kindnesses, but they mattered. Richard cleared his throat, the sound sharp enough to pull Margaret from her thoughts. He was 52, handsome in the way successful men often are, with silver threading through his dark hair and expensive suits that fit perfectly. But there were lines around his mouth that spoke of tension held too long. "Mother, Victoria, and I have been discussing something important," he began, his tone the one he used in boardrooms. Clinical. Efficient. The house is being renovated next month. The east wing, including your suite. We think it might be better if you stayed at Meadowbrook during the construction. Margaret's heart sank. Meadowbrook. The assisted living facility on the edge of town. She had visited friends there. Bright hallways that smelled of disinfectant and defeat. Activities coordinated by well-meaning staff who spoke too loudly, as if age had stolen everyone's hearing. "I see," Margaret said softly. "For how long?" Victoria jumped in, her smile practiced and empty. "Well, that depends on the construction timeline. These things always take longer than expected. Could be 3 months, could be 6. But Meadowbrook is lovely, truly. They have bridge games every Thursday." Margaret nodded slowly. She understood what wasn't being said. This wasn't about construction. This was about convenience. About making room in their lives by tucking her away where she wouldn't be a reminder of mortality, of the slower pace of life, of the past they were too busy to honor. Keisha, who had been quietly clearing plates near the sideboard, paused. Margaret saw her shoulders tense, saw the internal struggle play across her face. In that moment, Margaret wanted to signal her to stay silent, to not risk her position. But Keisha had never been good at staying silent when something mattered. "Excuse me," Keisha said, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made everyone turn. "I apologize for interrupting, but I need to say something." Richard's expression darkened. "Keisha, this is a family matter." "I know, Mr. Chen. And I know it's not my place. But Mrs. Margaret is my responsibility during the day, and I've gotten to know her these past months." Keisha moved closer to the table, her hands clasped in front of her. "Do you know what she does every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon?" The question hung in the air. Victoria and Richard exchanged glances, confusion replacing irritation. "She volunteers at the children's literacy program at the community center downtown," Keisha continued. "Has been doing it for 20 years. The kids there, they wait for her. Call her Grandma Margaret. She's teaching a little boy named Marcus to read right now. He's 7, been struggling in school. Last week, he read his first full book to her. Cried when he finished because he was so proud." Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. She had never mentioned this to Richard and Victoria. It had felt too small, too personal to share with people who measured worth in quarterly earnings and social standing. Keisha wasn't finished. And on Mondays, she meets with 3 other widows from her old neighborhood. They've been friends for 40 years. They have lunch at that little diner on 5th Street, the one with the torn booth seats and the waitress who knows everyone's order. Mrs. Margaret pays every time because two of those ladies are on fixed incomes and too proud to accept help any other way. Richard shifted uncomfortably. We didn't know. There's more you don't know, Keisha said, her voice softening. She writes letters. Real letters, with pen and paper. To former neighbors, to people she met once at a hospital waiting room 10 years ago, to her granddaughter at college even though they also text. She told me once that letters are different because they require time, and giving someone your time is the truest gift. Tears were forming in Margaret's eyes now. She hadn't realized Keisha had noticed these things, had pieced together the quiet life she'd built in the margins of this grand house. My grandmother raised me, Keisha continued, looking directly at Richard. She wasn't wealthy. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood you wouldn't drive through. But she taught me that a person's worth isn't in their productivity or their independence. It's in their humanity, their history, their heart. She paused, gathering courage. Your mother isn't a burden, Mr. Chen. She's a blessing you're too busy to see. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Victoria looked away, suddenly fascinated by her manicured nails. Richard's jaw worked, emotions playing across his face, anger, shame, something that might have been grief. Margaret found her voice, small but steady. Keisha, dear, you don't need to fight this battle for me. Yes, I do, Keisha said, turning to her with gentle firmness. Because you'd never fight it for yourself. You've spent your whole life putting others first. Your husband, your son, everyone who needed you. You deserve someone in your corner now. Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. For a moment, Margaret thought he would storm out. Instead, he walked to the window, his back to the room. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I remember when Dad died, he said quietly. You held everything together. Kept his business running until I was ready to take over. Managed the funeral, the estate, all of it. Never complained. Never fell apart, at least not where I could see. He turned, and Margaret was startled to see moisture in his eyes. I was 35 years old, and I needed my mother to be strong. And you were. You always have been. Richard, Margaret began, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as this permanent fixture, always there, always capable. And then when you needed help, when you couldn't live alone anymore, I told myself I was doing the right thing by bringing you here. But I didn't make room for you in our lives. I made room for the idea of you. Victoria reached for her husband's hand, her own eyes glistening. We've been so focused on our own lives, our schedules, our commitments. I'm sorry, Margaret. The apology hung in the air, fragile and real. Keisha stepped back, sensing the moment shifting into something private. But Margaret reached out, catching her hand. Stay, she said simply. Richard returned to the table, sitting down heavily. He looked older suddenly, or perhaps just more human. Tell me about Marcus, he said. The boy you're teaching to read. Margaret's face transformed, worry giving way to joy. He's wonderful. Reminds me of you at that age, actually. So determined. He struggles with the words, gets frustrated, but he never gives up. I gave up reading to you, Richard said suddenly. Do you remember? You used to read to me every night. Then somewhere around 12 or 13, I decided I was too old for it. You offered to keep the tradition going, said we could read more grown-up books. But I said no. He looked down at his hands. I wish I hadn't. It's never too late to start again, Margaret said gently. Over the following weeks, something shifted in the Chin household. Richard began joining his mother for breakfast, asking about her volunteer work, her friends, the small details of her days. Victoria started including Margaret in planning the charity gala, valuing her decades of experience with social events. But the most unexpected change came from Richard himself. He reached out to the community center, offering to fund a major expansion of the literacy program. More than that, he began volunteering there himself, one Saturday a month, reading to children alongside his mother. Keisha watched these transformations with quiet satisfaction. One evening, as she helped Margaret prepare for bed, the older woman took her hand. You took a great risk, speaking up that night, Margaret said. Some things are worth the risk, Keisha replied. You reminded my son of something he'd forgotten, Margaret continued. That love isn't just provision and protection. It's presence. It's paying attention. It's seeing the person, not just the relationship. Your grandmother taught you well, Margaret said warmly. Keisha smiled. She did. She used to say that everyone deserves to be seen, really seen, at least once a day. To have someone look at them and recognize their full humanity. Wise woman. She was. You would have liked each other. 6 months later, the East Wing renovation was complete. Margaret's suite was beautiful, updated but still comfortable, still hers. But she spent less time there now. The family had started having real dinners together, conversations that meandered and mattered. Richard had even convinced her to join the board of the literacy program, valuing her insight and experience. On a Tuesday afternoon, Margaret sat in the community center, listening to Marcus read. His voice was growing more confident with each session. Across the room, Richard worked with a young girl who was stumbling through a picture book about dragons. Keisha, who had accompanied them, watched from the doorway. She thought about her grandmother, about the lessons that get passed down through generations when we're paying attention. About how speaking truth, even when your voice shakes, can shift the foundation of everything. Margaret looked up, catching Keisha's eye. She smiled, and in that smile was gratitude, affection, and recognition. Two women from different generations, different backgrounds, different lives, connected by the simple radical act of seeing each other's worth. Some stories don't have dramatic endings. Some resolutions are quiet, built in daily choices to show up, to pay attention, to honor the people we've been given to love. This was one of those stories. And in its gentleness, it held a truth, that our elders carry not just years, but wisdom, history, and love that continues giving if we're willing to receive it. The greatest inheritance isn't money or property. It's the time we choose to share, the attention we choose to give, and the courage to speak up when silence would be easier but wrong.